Greetings to you in the name of Yahusha, the Hashwar Hebrew name for Jesus. I'm Michael Hoshaya, and I'm with you today to continue in the series Revelation in Light of Daniel with Part 8, the 10 Horns on the Fourth Beast. We've recently learned a lot of history, and we've spanned a bunch of years here just briefly learning what was going on from Daniel chapter 2 all the way up to currently Daniel chapter 7. We read about the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had about a statue, which is here. This statue here is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And we learned that the head of gold was Babylon. The silver chest and arms was Medo-Persia. The belly and waist of brass was Greece. And we learned that the two legs were of Rome. The two legs were made of iron, and we also learned that it was Emperor Diocletian who broke up the empire to the west and the east. So these legs represent the split of the Roman Empire. Now, as it came about, there was a lot of strife and grief. We're going to learn about that again today. And these 10 toes are what we're focusing on. These 10 toes are not solid iron. So let's go back and read about these 10 toes. Let's get rid of that pen. And come over here and read in Daniel chapter 2, verses 41 through 43. It says, "Whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, forasmuch as thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cling one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." So if we see right here in verse 42 and 43, it says that the iron toes are part of the iron. The toes are made of iron and clay. So that means that the strength of the empire before it was in the toes. But the toes themselves are not of the empire, but they shall continue in the way that they ruled, which we learned that Rome ruled with brutality and violence, which continued the principle of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who desecrated the altar and the temple of God, built a statue of Zeus with his face upon it in the Holy of Holies, and would kill anyone found with Scripture, sell them into slavery. They could not circumcise themselves as per the promise of the covenant made with Abram about the descendants through circumcision, and they were forbidden to do all these things. So Antiochus IV started the principle of do as I tell you, believe as I tell you, or you will die. And we learned all the way through Rome that this was continued through emperors such as, examples in the previous video, Tiberius, Caligula, and Nero. Nero would actually burn Christians and Jews on poles to light the streets of Rome. And so, understanding that, we now understand that the toes are individuals who continue the reign or rule of the Roman Empire. And that's where we are today. And this is our study. We're going to learn that these toes right here are also represented in Daniel's visions, chapter 7, which we will read shortly, being this guy's 10 horns. And hopefully we're going to mark down each one of them as we go through our studies. This was Rome, and it trampled on everything that came in front of it, and it destroyed it, and it did it with brutality and violence. unmeasured. So, with that being the case, let's go ahead and read what Daniel says about these 10 horns, and which are the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's statue. So we're going to go to Daniel chapter 7, and we're going to begin reading in verse 8, and we're going to go through to verse 12. So let's begin. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them. You know what? I'm sorry. Let me go ahead and read verse 7, which tells us of the beast coming in and the horns on its head. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn. You may remember that we read in Daniel chapter 8 where a little horn came out of one of the 4 horns on the goat. However, this one does not come out of a horn, it comes up by itself. So let's see that again. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set. We have to stop right here. We have to recognize something. This little horn that just came up right here in verse 8, there came up among them another little horn. And down here at the bottom it said, and a mouth speaking great things. You'll see that this horn, this little horn that came up and plucked out the first 3 horns on the beast's head by the roots, is continuing on into the judgment right here. And it says, a fiery stream issued forth. And in verse 10 it says, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. That is him who sits upon the throne of judgment. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. This is the final judgment in, I believe it's chapter, I want to say 19 or 20. I think it's chapter 20 of the book of Revelation, where it shows that the books were opened, and this is the final judgment after the 1,000-year reign. So here Daniel is seeing not only the vision of the empire that was to come and the continuation, the horns on its head, he's also seeing the final judgment. But let's see why that is so important. I beheld then because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed, and given to the burning flame. This is very important, because we see that the horn that came up among these continuations under Rome is still speaking great things at the time of judgment. This is very important. This is our clue to how we can track the behaviors of Antichrist all the way up to the book of Revelation, because this little horn was speaking great and pompous words. Now, let's continue on. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. The way we must understand this scripture is this. When Babylon was defeated by Medo-Persian Empire, some of the Babylonian ceremonies and traditions continued on because King Cyrus wanted the people to see, hey, I'm not that bad of a person. Keep your traditions and your ceremonies. So that continued on for a time up until a king come along and said no more. And same thing happened with Greece. As a matter of fact, it is believed that when Alexander the Great was laying on his deathbed, he was looking up at an image of the god of Persia, and so Alexander allowed the Persians under his rule to continue believing as they wanted to believe. So this is how the kingdoms before it were prolonged for a time, but it wasn't until it didn't last. It was eventually snuffed out. So that's how we understand verse 12 as concerning the rest of the beasts. They had their dominion taken away. As Persia defeated Babylon, the kingdom was taken away. Greece defeated Persia, their kingdom was taken away, and so on and so forth. Yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. This is how the kingdoms would absorb those empires that they defeated. So here it is that we've learned about these horns, and we've learned about this one particular horn that came up speaking great and pompous words. Here's where it gets exciting, and here's where your notes are going to come in greatly, because I've gone ahead and set up a template for your notes to follow. I will show that to you in a moment. But as for right now, inquiring minds want to know, who were the continuations of the Roman Empire? Well, let's find out. As you can see, here is Rome and the 10 horns. Let's start knocking them down. Horn 1. We learned that Emperor Diocletian in 286 split the Roman Empire into the east and west. And by the 400s AD, the Western Empire was in its death throes from being overtaxed to support the army and bureaucracy, as well as barbarian attacks. This is where our horns begin. Alaric I and his Visigoths captured and sacked Rome in 410 AD. Shortly after this, Alaric died, and his successor Ataulf drew off the Visigoths to Gaul and died in 415 AD. His successor Wallia received formal permission from Honorius. That was the emperor of the West. That the Western Empire was Rome in Italy. And remember, this is after the breakup of the empire from west to east. So here it is, we see that the emperor Honorius gave Wallia permission to settle in southwestern Gaul, where at Toulouse he founded the Visigothic dynasty. Spain, already divided between the Vandals, the Suebi, and the Alans, was in like manner formally made over to those invaders by Honorius, whose authority at his death in 423 AD was nominal in the western part of the continent. And this is found in Funk and Wagnall's New Encyclopedia 1971. These same Vandals invaded North Africa and took Carthage in 429. The Vandals sought to expand their power as successor to Rome in 455 AD and pillaged Rome itself. This is where we get our modern term of Vandals. As someone who vandalized something, goes in, steals, and breaks apart and destroys. These were the guys who did that to Rome. They sacked it so thoroughly that the term Vandals is still used today to recognize someone who does such things. So our first horn number 1, right here, were the Vandals. So if we go back to our picture, we can look right here on our horns right here. The number 1 right here was the Vandals. Sorry about the writing, it's kind of hard to do on the screen. Nonetheless, Here it is. Now let's go back and continue on to horn 2 is. Now I have to be very brief through this because we've got a lot of stuff to go through and I'm trying not to break this video up. So horn number 2, the Heruli. And in 476 AD, about 20 years after the Vandals sacked Rome, the Heruli, under the leader Odoacer, deposed Romulus Augustus. This guy, Romulus Augustus, was the last Roman emperor. There would be no more emperors in Rome after this time. So let's continue on. The last Western Roman emperor. The Eastern emperor Zeno recognized Odoacer as the legitimate continuation of the Roman government in Italy. So this is where we find that horn number 2 is none other than the Heruli. Oops, sorry about that. There it is right there. Heruli, and it is horn number 2. I'm not going to go back to our picture, but I will mark them off in just a moment. So here it is that we see the Ostrogoths. The Heruli have taken over and were recognized as the continuation of the Roman Empire. However, check this out. This is very interesting. Odoacer was an Arian. An Arian is a person who believed, that was in contradiction to the Trinitarian belief of the time, that Mary, this is just one of the topics, but Mary was not the mother of God, which is actual truth. Mary was the mother of God the Father's Son, Jesus, or his actual name being Yahwasha in Hashwar Hebrew. I will provide a link for so you can begin to learn about Hashwar Hebrew in the comments. So at any rate, the Heruli did not believe the same thing that Rome believed, that Mary gave birth to God the Father in the Son, that the Son is the same as the Father and equal to him. The Arians did not believe this. So here it is that the Heruli and the Vandals before them, who believed the same thing, were used against each other. So let's find out. Odoacer was an Arian. However, after an appeal by the Bishop of Rome, the Bishop of Rome back then is what is the equivalent of what we know today as the Pope. Zeno dispatched Theodoric, the leader of the Ostrogoths, to drive out the Heruli in 488 AD. The Orthodox bishops of Italy, disliking Odoacer's Arianism, supported the Arian invader Theodoric. Did you just catch that? Here it was that the Vandals were Arians, but they were recognized to continue as the Roman rule. And then here it is that the Heruli came in and pretty much ran the Vandals out, but the Heruli were also Arian. And here we just learned about our third horn, the Ostrogoths, the leader of them, Odoacer, was also an Arian. But yet here it is that they're killing each other. Why? The Orthodox bishops of Italy, disliking Odoacer's Arianism, supported the Arian invader Theodoric as representing an almost Orthodox emperor. With their help, Theodoric broke Odoacer's sturdy resistance in 5 years of war and persuaded him to a compromise peace in 493 AD. He invited Odoacer and his son to dine with him in Ravenna, fed them generously, and slew them with his own hand. He cut their throats after their bellies were full. And this was all prompted by who? The Bishop of Rome. Pay attention to that. Let's continue on. The third horn, horn number 3, the Ostrogoths, as we just learned, Theodoric. Ostrogothic rule of Italy, though accepted as a means of getting rid of the Heruli, remained unpopular with the Bishop of Rome and the Roman Catholic population. General Belisarius, who had been sent from Constantinople, the Eastern Empire, in 533 AD with 500 transport ships and 92 warships to rid Africa of the Vandals, came to Italy in 536 to drive out the Ostrogoths. The Ostrogothic forces were meager and divided. The people of Rome held Belisarius as a liberator. The clergy, that is the Bishop of Rome and his those below him, welcomed him as a Trinitarian. He entered Rome unopposed. So here it is. This is now the time where we go back to our picture of the beast. So here it is that we've learned that, I'm just going to use abbreviations. Horn number 1 was the Vandals. Horn number 2 was the Heruli, who ended up killing the final emperor of Rome. And then horn number 3 was the Ostrogoths. So with that being said, all of these 3 groups that were recognized by the emperors as continuations to rule in Rome and continuations of Rome have now been plucked out. By who? The Bishop of Rome. Remember this, because now we're about to find out what's going on and how they were plucked up. Let's continue on. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 7 and verse 8. It says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn. Remember, Antiochus was called a little horn that came out of one of those horns, but this one came up by itself, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. We've just learned that those 3 horns that were plucked up by the roots were none other than the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths. So, let's continue on. Here it is that we find the little horn that came up. Daniel chapter 7 verse 8, we just read that. We have learned from studying history that the Roman Empire was split into 2 parts by Diocletian, and as a result, the Western Empire, in its weakened state, became the target of barbarian invasion. To keep the peace and pretty much wash their hands of what was going on in the West, the Eastern emperors simply recognized the Vandals, Heruli, and Ostrogoths as legitimate continuations of the Roman government. They gave them their blessing. These 3 groups represent our first 3 horns of Daniel's vision. And here it is. Let's see. Here we see that another horn, not of the first horns, came up and did away with 3 of the first horns. Now you remember I told you that it was the bishops of Rome who were sending messages to the emperors saying, these guys are nasty. They're pagans. They don't believe like we do. You need to get rid of them. And this is exactly what happened. And the bishops of Rome came into power in 554 AD, which is where the little horn comes up at. We're going to read a small piece here. It's further down in the document, but I will read it for you here as soon as I find that document. I apologize. It was in 554 AD when Justinian, after sending in Belisarius to rid the Western Empire of the Goths and the Gothic Wars, that he gave the power to the bishops of Rome to choose whom was going to lead the empire. Now this is where things get a little crazy, because now the Bishop of Rome, which we know as the Pope today, was authorized by the Eastern Emperor Justinian in 554 AD to choose who was going to lead and rule over the Roman Empire. This is important because this means that these bishops of Rome were pulling the reins and controlling everything. And these were the same ones that had the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths killed by each other, and then the Ostrogoth killed off by Belisarius, a Trinitarian. So here it is that we see another horn coming up, and it had eyes and a mouth of a man that spoke pompous words. Now remember, we just read in Daniel where this little horn was speaking all the way up to judgment. So this tells us that this little horn is going to continue the principle, and those who follow after these to do exactly what Antiochus IV Epiphanes did, which is, if you do not believe and do what I tell you to do, you are going to be punished and die. And this is exactly what happened to the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths. At the time, let's go ahead and read this down. At the time of the Ostrogoths, it was, I've narrowed down the possibilities of this particular bishop that began the continuation of the idea, the pompous words, according to historical timeline, to Saint Sixtus III of 432 AD. As I stated, he is not the originator of the idea, and like Saint Sixtus III continued the idea, others like him did as well. So, with that being the case, we now learn that when Justinian gave the papacy, what we now know as the papacy, the bishops of Rome, authority to choose whomever they wanted to rule. This is the little horn. But you'll remember in Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, it said there were 10 horns. And then another one came up. That makes 11 horns. This is where I'm going to go ahead and show you the notes of how your notes may look. As we learned through the beast of Daniel, I asked you to take notes on the heads of the animals or the beast that Daniel mentioned. So your notes should read something along the lines: Babylon, lion of Daniel chapter 7:4, head 1, Medo-Persia, bear, Daniel chapter 7 verse 5, head 2, Greece, leopard, Daniel 7:6, head 3, 4, 5, and 6, because remember the leopard had 4 heads. Rome, the beast, Daniel chapter 7 verse 7, is head number 7. This is very important. Make sure your notes show this. You can write it down however you want, but the total number of heads is 7. We're going to get into that a little bit later. As for the 10 horns, in Daniel chapter 7 verses 8 through 12, we learn that the horn number 1 is the Vandals, and the horn number 2 was the Heruli, and horn number 3 was the Ostrogoths. And then the little horn was given power. Now this is where you need to write. This, once the little horn came up, that made the total number of horns on this beast 11 and not 10. But you'll see right here that the little horn that came up are horns number 4 and 11. This is interesting because we're going to learn in the book of Revelation how this one horn represents, how this little horn is both 4 and 11. All right, let's get into, as you can see, I've listed the continuations. One was Charlemagne, which was horn 5 and head 2. Why am I marking these down as heads? Because it is going to, not only does it represent continuations of Daniel's visions, but we're going to find it later in Scripture too when we get into the book of Revelation. Charlemagne, whom the Bishop of Rome actually held a coronation and crowned him, was horn number 5. And horn number 6 was Otto, King Otto of the Germans, who is horn number 6 and head number 3. 7 was Charles V, horn number 7, head 4. Napoleon Bonaparte, believe it or not, was recognized. by the church as a continuation of Rome. As a matter of fact, a lot of the artwork of Napoleon on his horse and some statues and so forth represent him in Roman armor from the days of Rome, of the Empire of Rome. So he is horn number 8 and head 5. Mussolini and Hitler. Now this is interesting and it's very debatable. I will give you the info on that, which we're going to get into a little bit of history, and which is horn 9 and head 6. Now the 10th horn is not yet known, but it is horn number 10 and it is head number 7, which we will learn as we go along. But for now, let's go back to our history and so forth. So we learned that the horn number 1, 2, and 3 were the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths. The little horn that came up, which was horn number 4, was none other than the bishops of Rome, who continued doing what Antiochus IV Epiphanes did. And we learned about the Imperial Restoration. This event is known as the Imperial Restoration, and it lasted from 554 to 800 AD. Yet by Justinian's decree, the bishops of Rome, the Pope today, decided who would rule and thereby have rule. This Imperial Restoration constitutes the wounded head of Revelation 13:3, which we're not worried about right now. We learned that Justinian did that and gave the bishops of Rome power. And so right here is the bishops of Rome that took care of the Goths. The first one was St. Sixtus III. He recognized the Vandals. John II ordered the Vandals removed. St. Felix III ordered the Heruli removed. And St. Silverius, who was martyred, ordered the Ostrogoths removed through the emperor. And Vigilus was under the Imperial Restoration of 554 AD to 800 AD. And here we come now to the horn number 5 and head number 2, which was Charlemagne. After the demise of the Vandals, Heruli, and Ostrogoths, our little horn was given power to choose whom would rule in the Western Empire of Rome. This indirect reign, occurring during Justinian's Imperial Restoration, and is considered by many scholars to be the 4th continuation of the Roman government. For understanding, our 11th little horn has become the 4th horn of the first horns. And let's see, here it is about Charlemagne being recognized. On Christmas Day is Charlemagne, king of the Franks, in chlamys and sandals. I guess it's the attire of a patricius, a Romanus, knelt before St. Peter's altar in prayer. Pope Leo suddenly produced a jeweled crown and set it upon the king's head. The congregation, perhaps instructed beforehand to act accordingly to ancient ritual, as the Senatus Populus Romanus, confirming a coronation thrice, that is 3 times, they cried out, "Hail to Charles the Augustus, crowned by God and God the Great, and peace-bringing Emperor of the Romans." So we can see that horn number 5 is actually Charlemagne, and we can see the coronation. And horn number 6 is the, let's see, Charlemagne Emperor. Horn number 6 had 3. During the century and a half that followed Charlemagne's coronation, his empire slowly disintegrated under weak successors. By 936 AD, the German Saxons, this is Otto, the Duke of the Saxons, he came in and he was recognized by the empire as regency for God on earth and so forth. And he, called the imperial crown Corona Urbis et Orbis. Yeah, I'm not really good at Latin and all that. So at any rate, King the Otto was now made a continuation. And here it is, that King Charles V is horn number 7. After the death of Conrad IV in 1254 AD, the empire was so torn apart from within by rival groups that a 19-year-old interregnum time of no emperor occurred. In 1273 AD, Rudolf I of the Habsburg family was elected emperor, but the peak of his empire came 267 years later when Rudolf's descendant, Charles V, was crowned in Bologna, I'm not sure how they want to say that, by Pope Clement VII in 1530 AD. So we can see where King Charles was crowned and continued the Roman Empire. And now we come up to Napoleon Bonaparte, horn 8 and head 5. After the horrors of the French Revolution that rocked Europe, there was a man by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte that came to power, but he wanted far more than just to be king of France. He had visions of the Roman Empire dancing in his head, and he himself as the emperor. Historian Will Durant worded Napoleon's desire best. He dreamt of rivaling Charlemagne and uniting Western Europe. Napoleon viewed himself as a successor to Caesar and so forth. Napoleon distinguished himself in the French Revolutionary Wars and was general by 24, though defeated in Egypt. Immediately upon this staged vote, Napoleon began charming Pope Pius VII and succeeded in his quest. Napoleon's coronation was made known on December the 2nd, 1804. So you can see that Napoleon was crowned and continued the empire. And here we come to Mussolini and Hitler. Now, this is an interesting thing, and it is debatable. But at any rate, now that Napoleon was ousted in 1814, what was left of Germany and Italy were small states and such, and those themselves were being torn apart from within. But around 1871, all of non-Habsburg Germany under Garibaldi, King of Prussia, united all of Italy under North Italy's King of Sardinia, Piedmont, introduced Benito Mussolini, and so forth. The term fasci has its root in Roman as fasces, which was an axe wrapped in a bundle of rods signifying unity and authority. It was carried by Roman consuls as a symbol of their office. Since 1870 AD, when King Victor Emmanuel's Italian army had defeated the armies of the Pope and captured Rome, there had been a tense standoff between the popes and the new rulers of Italy. The Concordat. Here's where it gets debatable. At this time, Mussolini went in. This was coming in around World War II, and things were getting heated up in the war. And Mussolini was speaking with the Bishop of Rome. He said, "Look, here's the deal. Rome had wanted to be their own imperial state. They wanted to be recognized as their own little country within a country. Mussolini gave them this at the signing of the Lateran Treaty. He recognized the Vatican as its own state, thereby being a country within a country. The Vatican is in Rome, and Italy is the country. So the Vatican is a country within a country. So with that being the case, it is believed that during this time at that Roman at the signing of the Lateran Treaty, that Mussolini was recognized, not necessarily coronated, but recognized as the rightful ruler of Italy, and so therefore became a continuation. And it was under the term fasci and the fascist, where we get our word fascist, that came from Roman rule, Roman times, that Mussolini did such things. Now with Hitler, once Hitler found out what was going on, he heard what was going on, he actually started speaking with the Pope behind the doors, behind closed doors. And although there is no definitive documentation that the Pope recognized him as a continuation of the Roman Empire, it was Hitler who brought in the crown jewels of the Germans, King Charles and so forth, and brought them to Germany. And as he knows that King Charles V, was recognized and coronated as a continuation of the Roman Empire. So it is believed that this was done with the Pope's approval, because Hitler wanted the Pope of the time to say, "Hey, here's the deal. We don't want you getting involved in what we got going on in the war. And just like Mussolini, I want to be recognized as a continuation." This is possibly the talks that were going on behind closed doors. However, we know that Mussolini aligned with Hitler, and thereby, with Mussolini being recognized as the continuation of Rome, and Hitler being aligned with him, believed to be recognized as continuation of Rome. Thereby, we have our horn number 9 and head number 6. Now, understand that even though Mussolini and Hitler are dead, no one has come to power as the ruler of Italy, with the exception of the Vatican and the Catholic Church. So, how is it that the popes of today are recognized as rulers of Rome? Well, that was done in Justinian. That was done in 554 AD by Justinian, and nothing has changed that. So, as it is currently, we are still up under the recognized continuation of Mussolini and possibly Hitler to this very day, because no one has come forward and been recognized as the continuation of Rome. But we do know that the Pope does have a lot of political power in Rome and Italy. Therefore, we will recognize Rome and the Catholic Church as the harlot, because this is the one, because of Justinian's authority given to the bishops of Rome. They pull the reins, they recognize, and this is how kings listen to the popes. As a matter of fact, the Pope's authority sometimes comes in so aggressive that back in the day, there was one Pope that disavowed. He pretty much told the king that, you know what, we don't recognize your authority, and until you come to apologize to me, you will no longer have authority as king. This guy actually packed up his stuff, went over to Rome, and sat out in front of the doors of the Pope at the time, and waited 3 days for the Pope to come out and absolve him of his errors. This is the kind of power that the papacy has, or it had at the time. So, as we can see, we've come through the 10 horns, recognize the 10 horns. That means there's one left. And when that one comes around, that's going to be towards the end times. So, as it is right now, we have learned that the 10 horns of this beast have been mostly identified, with the exception of the last. Because remember, what these horns do not show is the one little horn that was come up. So you had the 10 horns of that beast, and then you had this guy who was speaking pompous words against the Most High, and it continued all the way up to judgment. Well, who do we know that has done such things? Oh, the accuser, that is the old serpent, that devil, who is driving all things. So hopefully today you've learned everything there is to know about these 10 horns and continuations, and these will propel us into Revelation chapter 12. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I will check, or you may send them to me on Facebook. My profile is public. You may send any questions or concerns that you have to me, and I will answer them as quickly as possible. And until we begin to discuss the book of Revelation and transition into it, I hope you've enjoyed yourself and had something to learn. Until next time, have a good day.